welcome to this technical session, ArcGIS Online Security, Privacy, and Compliance Overview. My name is Andrea Rosso. I'm lead architect on ArcGIS Online, and I'm presenting here with Michael Young, who's our Chief Information Security Officer for products. And today we'll touch on various security topics to do with ArcGIS Online and also sort of hybrid architectures when you're combining it with your on-premises servers and portals. Let me start by saying that ArcGIS Online is a multi-tenant system. When you, as a user, are using it, you get a cloud GIS, a virtual portal on our systems, and you are able to manage your data, you're able to analyze it, you're able to share it, and also manage your users and everything around it. And all of this sits on the same platform, the same infrastructure and systems and so on. So that brings up a lot of questions about security, privacy, and so on. So this is what we're going to try to address in this session. I'll talk for the first approximately half of the session about what settings and what things you can control as a user and administrator of a ArcGIS Online subscription, and then to do with security. And then Michael will talk a little bit more about various hybrid architectures that customers typically set up and security information around that, in addition to infrastructure and compliance information. So let me start with what I call platform security. So again, these are the settings and the security-related things that you can control in ArcGIS Online. And the first thing to understand is really our portal information model. So when you start using ArcGIS Online, you get a organization or subscription or portal. We call it it's all the same thing, but we call it various things sometimes. And within this portal, you manage your users, you invite users into the portal. So there are users who own items. Items are your information. So they could be data sets, services, maps. And you can combine these users and these items into groups so that they can collaborate on this information. So let me talk about those three things in a little bit more detail. So items, as I said, are the information that you're dealing with in your portal. They have a type. So there are things like web maps, various services like feature services, tile services, and so on. And there are data sets or data, things like CSV, shapefiles, file geodatabases, etc. So those are all different types of items that you create and manage. And these are all private by default. So when you create them as a user, they are not accessible to anybody but yourself. After you create them, you can then share them out to who you want. You can share them out to groups, so groups of users who can then see that particular item. You can share them out to your entire organization, so your portal, everybody who's using that particular organization. And then to everyone, meaning the public, meaning anonymous users. So you're exposing, say, a useful map out to the public and you want to disseminate that information. Then there's users. Users are modeled the actual people who are, say, working with your GIS. They own items and groups, so users create items and groups. They also have this setting on them to tell who can discover them. So they can be private by private. They can be basically that no one can discover them. So their information is not accessible to anybody. They can be discoverable at the organization level, so everybody in your organization can search for that user and find them. And they can be discoverable by everyone. Maybe you want to have some sort of public persona. You're publishing some important information and you want people to understand who it's coming from. Users have a profile. So users can add information about themselves in a description, and they can add a thumbnail and a few other things so that when people discover them, they can see who they are. And then users have a role. The role determines what they can do. We have 3 built-in roles that can be assigned to a user. The first is the administrator, so this is the super user of the organization who can basically do everything and manage the organization just like an IT administrator. We have a publisher, so this is a person who can actually publish services, so create feature services, create tile services. And then the lowest level is our user, which can do everything else. They can't publish, they can't administer, but they can create web maps and they can upload data like, say, CSVs and shapefiles and so on. And if those 3 don't really fit what you need to do, you can actually customize the roles. So we have these fine-grained privileges that you can mix and match and create what's called a custom role, and then assign that role to the user. And there's some 30 of them, I think, in terms of privileges that you can switch on and off. And but we provide these sort of templates of roles so that you can start from sort of these predefined combinations and things like a view-only user or a editor or a few other common types. And then you can then further customize from there. Roles are good for obviously restricting access. You might only want to give read-only permissions to a certain class of users. But they are also useful for restricting credits using services. So I don't know if most of you know, but when you get ArcGIS Online, it comes with a certain number of credits. Credits are used to consume premium services, things like geocoding and enrichment and other things. And you get a limited amount. And so some administrators want to prevent users from consuming those either on purpose or inadvertently by doing maybe some big jobs and other things. So you can actually switch off the privileges that allow you to do the things that consume credits. And then we have groups. Groups are basically containers of items and users, and any user within a group can see and use any item within that group. So it's a way to collaborate around a certain set of data. You might have one user who's creating a web map and disseminating it to a specific group of people. Groups also have a visibility, so they can be private, nobody can see them. They can be shared to the organization, so the organization can see them, and they can be shared out to everyone, so anyone can see them. But that setting doesn't necessarily translate to the items within the group. So it's not like if you put an item within a public group that it automatically is public. So that has confused people in the past, so I just wanted to mention that. So if you actually want to expose a public group that anybody can see with information in it, with different items, you have to make sure that all the items within that group are public also. And then the another thing on groups is that group owners can share items that they can see, that they have access to their own group. And that allows them to create these collections of data. So usually it comes up with curated groups of items that you want to give to people. So for instance, our Living Atlas is an example. So all the Living Atlas items are actually inside of a group, and you can discover that group and then see all the Living Atlas items. The other thing is our gallery, our featured gallery on ArcGIS Online is another group where we put all the items that are interesting and we want to highlight into that group. There's a specialized type of group that we call groups with update capability, and it's an extra switch on the group, and that allows any member of the group to actually edit or change the items within it. It gives you sort of much more power as a member of that group to sort of change anything you want, to change the web maps. So to collaborate on a web map, for instance, and have everybody be able to change it. We put some restrictions on that currently, just because of that power. So first of all, you can only be an admin. You can only create those groups as an admin of the organization. So the admin has to set them up first. The items and the users that are inside of those groups need to be within the organization that the group belongs to, so you can't collaborate with people outside of your organization. And then the capability can't be switched on and off on an existing group, so you have to create the group with that switch on or off. You have to make that decision at the very beginning. And this comes in handy in a lot of situations. We've seen a lot of emergency management type of shift type of scenarios where they have different shifts coming in an emergency situation like a fire and are updating maps throughout. And so all of the shift operators can actually modify the map as they rotate in and out every day. And then it also allows you to do collaborative editing, say on a feature service. And that brings me to my next topic, which is feature service editing. There's a lot of switches and knobs on feature service editing, and some of our users have been a little bit confused on this, so I wanted to sort of spend a little bit more time on this. When you publish a feature service, you have an editing switch that you can enable. So you can enable editing on a feature service. But the thing to be aware of is that there's always a set of users that can edit your feature service, and that is the owner. So whoever is publishing can always edit their own feature service. You don't have to enable editing for that. Admins of your organization can always edit a feature service. And members of these groups I just mentioned, these groups with update capabilities, can always edit a feature service, whether you've switched on editing or not. You want to switch on editing if you want to give anybody else the permission to edit feature services. And what that does is it allows anybody who can see the feature service to edit it. And that means if you share the feature service to your organization, anybody in your organization can edit it. If you share it anonymously or to the public, then anybody anonymously can edit it. So most of the time you want to be careful with that one. There are some use cases with crowdsourcing, et cetera, where you want people to give you the information in your feature service, but most of the time you probably don't want to set it public with editing on. There are a few controls once you set editing on that you can switch between. You can allow editing of anything, so add, update, and delete of any features in your feature service. You can only allow updating of attributes on existing features. So users can go and say reclassify some features or things like that. They can't actually do anything with the features themselves or actually add features. And then you can also set it to only allow adding new features. So that way maybe you're collecting data from anonymous users about information in your city or those kinds of things like 311 applications. So you only allow adding and not editing of existing information. There are a few privileges that you can customize in your custom role. that you can switch on and off to do with editing. There is something that we call edit. So if you switch that privilege off for a user, then they will not be able to edit any of your feature services in your organization. So that allows you to basically control who can actually edit things in your organization or not, no matter if editing is on or off. And then you also have this edit with full control privilege, which allows users with that privilege to override these settings like add feature only or update feature attributes only, and actually be able to edit or to manage any feature within the feature service. That allows you to give certain people the ability to basically curate the feature service. So you might have your anonymous users feeding in some data, and then you might have those 2 or 3 curators in your organization who are actually making changes and doing other things within your organization to clean up the data. Now let me talk a little bit about settings, organizational-wide settings that you can control as an administrator that have to do with security. So these are things that apply to your entire organization, not specifically to any specific group of users or other things. So one thing that you can switch on and off is whether your organization requires HTTPS. So this is about encrypting information between the client and our servers. If you don't have this enabled, we'll accept anything. If you have this enabled, we'll only accept encrypted HTTPS requests to our servers, and we'll reject anything else. By default, this is now on. So whenever you create a new organization on ArcGIS Online, this is on by default. It used to be off because HTTPS wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So the recommendation is to leave it on, but there are use cases where you might want it off, especially if you're creating web maps that use different content from different providers outside of ArcGIS Online that don't have HTTPS enabled. If you start mixing content and you're using HTTPS in your web map and you're mixing content with non-HTTPS sources, you might get warnings, you might get layers not loading, things like that. So, you kind of have to weigh what you're doing as an organization to switch that on and off. You can enable anonymous access or disable anonymous access to your organization. That means when people go to your organizational front page, every organization gets their own URL on ArcGIS Online. So once you go to that URL, whether you see a front page with information about your organization, you can customize that actually. You can put your logo, you can put a description, you can put a gallery of your maps, etc. If you switch anonymous access off, then people will just get a login, and it's really just for your organization to just be able to log in and for your users to log in and just use your content internally. There's something called standardized queries, so there's a switch there that we enforce a certain set of SQL statements on feature services. So for those of you familiar with feature service API, you can add a where clause basically to filter out certain features when you do queries. We enforce only certain SQL statements in that string, which is okay for 99% of the case, but there are a few use cases where if you want to do more complex SQL, you have to switch that off. And really, it's not a very common scenario anymore, but there are still people that need to do that. And if you switch that off, it might open you up to some SQL injection type of vulnerabilities potentially, depending on how your data is structured and so on. So, recommendation is don't touch that. It's enforcing this by default. You can now disable user editing their profile. So in some cases, customers do not want private information to be added to their users' description, so they have some compliance rules around that. So this allows you to switch off the ability for any of your users to add any information in their description. And you as an administrator can always do that, but the user themselves cannot do that. And finally, you can disable whether your users can share to the public, to everyone. So that's an important one if you're an organization that's sensitive to, that has sensitive data that you don't want to disseminate. You can disable that sharing, and your users won't be able to share. You as an admin can still share out to the public. So an admin can become a curator of information that goes out to the public if you need it to be that way, but your other users won't be able to. There's a few other settings that I'd like to mention. Oh, yeah.
Quick question. Do these rules apply to ArcGIS server services as well? Like feature server for Federated?
You're talking about the sharing to everyone? Or?
Yeah, and then the previous one about privileges, editing privileges.
They apply to if you're running Portal on premise, but I mean this is more for online. They apply to any items that are on ArcGIS Online. So if you're pointing to your on-premise service through items on online, you can control who has access to those items, but you can't, it won't actually switch on and off things that you might have on ArcGIS server on-premise.
So if you wanted to do this, you could have a publisher create a service, but then as the administrator, you could share that service.
Right. Right. So the publisher would only be able to share it up to the organization level, and then the administrator would be the one that says, yes, this looks okay, I can share it out to the public.
And that's just a setting in the feature service? Or?
No, that setting is in the organizational setting. So as an administrator, you'll see, I don't have an exact screenshot of it, but you'll see a settings, it's not a tab, it's a button. And when you go in there, there's under the general tab, you'll actually see that setting in there. I can show you later if you're interested. Trusted servers. So there's a fairly new option here called trusted servers. This has to do when you're actually communicating back to on-premise ArcGIS servers and portals. So in a browser, actually, if you have maps that are accessing information that are coming from your own servers, in a browser, the browser will actually not allow credentials to be sent to other servers than where the page is coming from. So you actually have to tell us, this is to do with web tier authentication. So when you use basic authentication and other types of, Windows, IWA, integrated Windows authentication. So if you have that set up on your server or portal and you're using that in your maps, the browser will actually block sending your credentials unless we actually in the code tell it to do that. So you actually have to tell us in ArcGIS Online, these are my trusted servers, and actually give the host names of your trusted servers to put them in there so that we know about it. So the integration with your local servers is actually much smoother. We have recently added the ability to purchase things via a shopping cart and e-commerce on the ArcGIS Online Marketplace. So users can go in and put in a credit card and actually purchase applications. We allow now the admin to control that, who can actually do that. So before they can actually purchase, the administrator has to assign them as purchasers in the system. And then finally, there's something called admin contacts, where you can actually list out which admins are going to be the ones that get contacted for various things to do with expiration notices of your subscription and credits, and also your users, who they'll be whenever they get some communication from the system, they'll have those admins listed there so that they can go to the admin for help to do with password resets and other things. As I mentioned before, the admin is like your IT administrator. It has all control over your organization. And so the admin has a lot of power on the users of the organization. An admin can actually see and manage all items, groups, and user profiles in the organization. They can actually also disable a user if, for instance, they find out that that user's password has been compromised or anything like that. They can disable the user without having to delete them right away or anything like that. And then they can re-enable that user later if once the password has been reset or whatever. They can delete the user if needed. They can reset a user's password. They can change the user's role to whatever they need it to be. And then there's a flag there which is to enable Esri access. So let me explain that one a little bit more. When we talk about security around ArcGIS Online, we've set up sort of a boundary around a certain set of infrastructure and sites and so on, where we manage information in a certain way on our back end, and also sort of what you have control over. So that everything that resides in that boundary is done a certain way. Now there is information that might go outside of that boundary, and there are other sites to do with the ArcGIS platform and even third-party applications where information might flow out of that boundary. And those other systems are not necessarily more secure or less secure. They're just different and done differently and on different infrastructure. So things like the forums on GeoNet, or just GeoNet in general, the training site, the support sites, Esri, etc. Those are actually running in different places and managed in a different way. So for users that want to use the same credentials to log into those as your organization's credential, we ask the admin to actually go and enable this Esri access to tell us that it's okay for their information to flow into these other systems. And then the other place that this also happens is in third-party applications. So if you use your credentials, there's a lot of applications now out there that have been built that use ArcGIS Online, or that allow you to do things with ArcGIS Online and allow you to enhance what you do on ArcGIS Online. And you log into those applications using your credentials. We've set up a system using something called OAuth, which allows those applications to not see your username and password and all that kind of stuff, so that those remain secret in our system. But once you've logged into the application can act on your behalf in any way that it needs to. So before you log in, we actually ask the user to make sure that they trust the application and that they know that this application will be able to act on their behalf. But it also sort of, is always good to understand where the application is coming from and make sure that it is the application you think it is. Because sometimes, there's various malicious things out there that impersonate applications. Anyway, next thing is authentication options. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about various switches and things that you can control around authentication of your users. By default, standard built-in users are username and password protected. But you can also enable something called multi-factor, where you have a second factor, which is your smartphone in this case, that has a constantly changing number that you also have to type in addition to the password for people to log in. You can control the complexity of your passwords for your organization if you don't like the settings that we have, or if you need to comply with certain IT security rules that you might have. So you can make them much more, require them to be much more complex. And then finally, you can integrate with your own identity provider. You might have a domain server or an LDAP that you use that you want to integrate with ArcGIS Online and just use those credentials or those users in ArcGIS Online. So let me talk a little bit more in detail about those. First of all, multi-factor. So again, multi-factor is where you require two or more different things to log in or to authenticate the user. The first one's always your password, usually something that you know, and then something that you have is your smartphone. In this case, running, right now we support two apps, Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticator. And these are apps that basically every 30 seconds they have a number that changes within them. And the user gets prompted for this number, and they have to type in the number before we'll let them in. This is something that your administrator right now needs to opt in for the organization, so they need to enable it. And then the users themselves will have to set this up because there are a couple of steps that they need to go through. Obviously, they have to have a smartphone that's able to run these applications. Nowadays, Androids and iPhones, they can all run these apps, but they have to have a smartphone, and then they actually have to go into their profile, enable this, and then scan a code that then gets downloaded to their smartphone, and then that rotating number starts going. We require right now that you have two administrators in the organization defined before we allow you to switch this on. That's because most of the time the users that you enable multi-factor on should really be your admins, which are the power users in your organization. So if by any chance anybody is able to steal their credentials, they would have a lot of power. So those are the ones that we recommend you switch MFA on. But in case an admin loses their smartphone, then there's always another admin who can help them reset things and get back to normal.
Are you going to add other, Duo or some of the other multi-factor authentication? Is that
well, we are sort of on the lookout for what would be something that we should add. So it's like I definitely would like to hear
RSA.
What sort of things. RSA.
Duo. What our organization uses.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we can. Yeah, right now, we've been sort of on the lookout for what people need it to be, and as I'll mention in the next slide, you can integrate with your own enterprise identity provider, and a lot of customers are doing it that way. They set up multi-factor on their own identity provider, and then that is usable with ArcGIS Online. So, if your internal setup uses Duo or RSA, then it'll just work.
Yeah, I would say that's true. That in general, if you're not doing the push two-factor authentication, because if you want the push of two-factor authentication, where you go to, on your screen with like Duo, or waiting for your phone to get pinged and you click verify, that is unique to each authenticator solution right now. So just the standard identifier one though, that's in our product right now, that'll work across all the authenticators.
You would have to go to the app and get the number and then enter it into your system.
Yeah, see, when you have Duo, I know you're thinking about, just saying accept and move on.
Okay.
But that's not a protocol that works across all the authentication.
The other thing you can customize, as I mentioned, is password policies. We, by default, right now have a password policy of 8 characters with at least 1 number and 1 letter. But you can customize this to be stronger. So an organization can customize how long the password is required to be and what kind of character classes you want, whether you want capitals, lowercase letters, numbers, etc., symbols, etc. You can also customize how often the password expires. By default, we don't have a default expiration in what you get, but you can easily customize that. So every 90 days, let's say your password expires. And then we also have a history. You can also set up a history requirement where user can't reuse n number of passwords when they do the password change. So you can customize all that to match what your organization needs. And then finally, it's this discussion of enterprise identity. So as I said, it's like we have settings in ArcGIS Online to do with what we call our built-in ArcGIS Online accounts. But you might have a lot more requirements, or you might have already your own system, and most sort of larger organizations do with an Active Directory or LDAP, etc. So you can integrate that into ArcGIS Online, so your users log into your own identity provider, and then we get an exchange back to ArcGIS Online that tells us that that user has been authenticated, and then they are logged in. And we do this via something called a protocol called SAML 2.0. So any identity provider that supports SAML 2.0, you should be able to get to work with ArcGIS Online. This includes something called Active Directory Federation Services, which is what you typically put onto something like Active Directory. We also have NetIQ and Shibboleth, and I believe we have about half a dozen that we list out on our website, and we're adding more. But typically, if it's SAML 2.0 compliant, it should work, and we'll actually try to help you out getting it working if something's doesn't. The way that you can set this up is that any user that you allow to log in to your identity provider can be auto-created on ArcGIS Online. So we have to create something in our online database so that you can see all the users in your organization that you can manage and that own items and groups and so on, as I talked about earlier. So whenever someone logs in from identity provider, we'll create a record for them. Or what you can do is you can do it by invitation. So you can send out an invitation to your users, and for them to log in, your identity provider has to let them in, and they also have to have an invitation ID to get into the system. So that way, that allows you to control the number of users within your organization, either that way or through your identity provider. You can mix and match. So you could have ArcGIS Online identities if you want, as well as your own enterprise identities. So that you might want to have all your employees in your domain server, but then you might have external people and contractors, etc., that are working on or collaborating on maps and other things that are just working on ArcGIS Online, and you can create just regular ArcGIS Online identities for that. Yeah?
So if you're integrating with like ABFS and you do the first thing, not the invitation, but they just automatically log in, what permission levels do you have by default? And can you say anything behind the scenes like, okay, this distribution group may have this kind of role or
right. So, I'm trying to think. The question is, when they log in from your identity provider and they auto get created, what roles do they have? I'm trying to think. I thought we allowed you to now set the role that they come in with, but not 100% on that. I need to check up on that.
Next question.
Oh, next question. I thought maybe you knew offhand.
And just to clarify, there's not any kind of cost associated with that integration?
No, there's no cost associated with that with that integration. Yeah, I just don't remember if you can't set it, it'll come in as a user for the lowest level. But I believe now that we allow you to set it, but I gotta confirm that. I don't want to give you the wrong information.
Email you.
Yeah. Yeah, you can come up later. We can maybe take a look. Or, yeah.
The user is locked out on their password. What options are available for them to gain access? Is it security questions or contact administrator, or what are the choices?
Yeah, they can reset their own password via a security question. So when they create their account, they get to choose a security question. They can do it self-service, or the administrator can actually reset their password if needed. So if they, I don't know, if their email doesn't work, or if they forgot their security question, etc. Real quick, last slide here for my section. Just keeping track of usage of what's going on in your organization. So there's a what we call a status dashboard or status page, which shows you information about what's going on in your organization, credit consumption, who's using the credits, what kind of content you have, maybe like public information that you have, all your members and what they're doing, and then also information about groups and so on. So you can keep an eye on that. There's now an option to actually download some of the information as a CSV, so you can then sort of bring it into various tools that you might want to keep an eye on things. Anyway, so that concludes my section. Okay, one more question? Yeah.
Is there a way, or is it planned in the future to be able to see which users are viewing which specific apps? There's a way to see how many views there are per app or map.
How many? So the question is there a way to see how many users are viewing?
Which specific users
use the particular app?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's already in the report. We do record that. So we do record that a user used a certain app to access a certain service, for instance. And I believe that there is a breakdown in the reports that shows you that. If not, yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're sort of collecting for feedback and adding to our reports as we go along. Okay, let me pass it over here to Michael.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'll be talking a little bit about deployment architecture. As far as common deployments for our customers, it's not too unusual to combine other capabilities beyond just ArcGIS Online to supplement their implementation. So I guess one of the questions I had yesterday when we had this workshop was, how many users out there just use ArcGIS Online alone and don't use, it combined with server or portal or anything else? So it's going to be a pretty select few. That's pretty common. So the reality is the most common implementations are some type of hybrid of incorporating other capabilities in your deployments. So I have here some other capabilities and services we have available from our organization that get combined with ArcGIS Online. The orange one there, managed services. It's also known as Esri Managed Cloud Services. So that is a offering that even has a FedRAMP accreditation. We'll talk about that. Cloud images, if you've heard of Amazon Machine Images or AMIs as they're also called, we have those for Amazon Web Services, and then we have images also for Microsoft Azure. That means you can spin up server instances of server or portal and manage those yourself. And last but not least is on-premise implementation. So that's where you spin up the product in your own infrastructure. So of course, when you're spinning up our product in your own infrastructure, portal and server, you are responsible for the management of the full stack. That's what's happening in the data center, the security components, SIM or IDS or whatever else, the operating system database components network, and the server product itself. Now, when you get to a cloud image, of course, what's happening out there, let's say in Amazon, we give you the AMI. The Amazon is taking care of managing the hypervisor and the data center for you, but you are responsible for the security of that instance, including the configuration and ongoing management of the operating system, database, network infrastructure, and our product. For managed services, that is where we come in and help facilitate and ensure those capabilities, the security, operating system, and everything else are locked down and patched and managed along with the application. And last but not least, of course, is ArcGIS Online, software as a service, platform as a service capabilities where you can just go out and consume. So the main difference between online managed cloud services is ArcGIS Online. It's a multi-tenant implementation, just go out and consume. Managed cloud services, we spin up separate instances specifically for your organization. So why do I talk about hybrid implementation so much? Well, it's because it's becoming more and more common for enterprise deployments. It's increasing rapidly as far as the amount of uptake. I think even this figure is probably lower than actually what's happening right now as far as how much of organizations are utilizing their data center operations and how much in the cloud, and a combination of those two. As far as hosting options, ArcGIS Online is, as I mentioned, a solution that's up and running in minutes. It gives you a centralized geo-discovery type of capability in a hybrid implementation. It's a multi-tenant offering, and its security authorization is what's called a FISMA Low. That's a government accreditation. For on-premise customers or deployments, this is solutions that typically take, ArcGIS Server and Portal, typically take months to years to get out there and deploy. It's a solution that you can, of course, put behind your firewall, and you manage and certify that solution. As far as the managed cloud services, which some customers may combine with that, it's a solution that's ready in a number of days because we're spinning up instances of the product specifically for you. Really, this is a solution that does give you the full platform of capabilities of ArcGIS Server and Portal, and it's dedicated instances for your organization. It has a FedRAMP moderate authorization behind it. As far as some scenarios between these different hybrid deployments, what's most appropriate for organizations? We'll take the first scenario of somebody who wants to share and process operational data with field workers. ArcGIS Online is a great match for this type of solution. It's rapid deployment, low total cost of ownership. You can utilize your content and base maps readily with it, and the data sets are not extremely sensitive. Now, in the scenario of where somebody might want to pilot a solution that requires base maps and some ArcGIS Server specific features, that might be something where if you're getting into this pilot concept, you might want to just spin up some Amazon machine images or Microsoft Azure images of our product. That will give you that full capability of server or portal as you need it, and be segmented for that pilot. Of course, I say pilot because you are really responsible for managing and maintaining that implementation. If you want to share sensitive data internally, but provide subsets to external and public users, then of course you get into the classic rendition of what a hybrid is, and that's maintaining your data center operations and something in the cloud. In this case, you have your internal data, of course, on premise. Sensitive information remains there. A subset can go and be exposed out to ArcGIS Online or only registered with ArcGIS Online. As far as registering ArcGIS Server services in ArcGIS Online, this is common for large enterprises, and its main advantage is, of course, data segmentation. So you keep your sensitive data in-house on your on-prem and just only the metadata out in ArcGIS Online. The question, of course, then becomes what is actually out in ArcGIS Online. what type of metadata. And depending on how you use a product, it could be username and password that's being stored in ArcGIS Online. But by default, that is not saved. The initial extent can also be saved into ArcGIS Online, or is in there. And you can adjust it to a less specific area. Names and tags can be addressed with your organization governance processes. That's always a fun one to think about, that ideally when you're getting into a cloud-based infrastructure, you do start establishing some rules and governance processes for your organization. Then there's IP address utilization or not. Ideally, you don't even register IP addresses. You just use your DNS names in the URLs that you're utilizing. For thumbnails, the small captured images, if you're concerned about those being posted out in the cloud, you can actually replace those with any image you want to. As far as the deployment patterns that were authorized by the government under FSMA, the first use case is for public dissemination. You can publish tiles in this case for fast, scalable visualizations, and it's great for sharing information with the public. It can also be used for mashing up services with external non-SSL-based sites. The second use case is for sharing operational data within or between a business, between businesses. You can register your ArcGIS server services in ArcGIS Online, which we talked about with that metadata a little bit before, and where your sensitive data is stored on premises or other authorized environment. ArcGIS Online operates as a discovery portal in this process, and you can utilize enterprise logins. As far as enterprise logins, how many people here use enterprise logins with two-factor authentication against ArcGIS Online? Okay, so I would say, what was that, about 1%? Who here uses two-factor authentication at all against ArcGIS Online? So it's probably that same 1%. So I asked that. I hope you understand that passwords are broken, and that the only thing between your information and everything out on the internet is your password right now. So I highly recommend you consider utilizing two-factor authentication. I'm not saying password management is broken by Esri. It's broken across the board. We do have a discussion where we even talk about that in a separate security workshop, but I just want to warn you, strongly recommend that, especially for the administrator. For using ArcGIS Online for disseminating information out to the public, some of the pros, of course, are you can offload that variable user load, so you get the infinite scalability, right? Handled by the ArcGIS Online team. You get public information segmentation from the sensitive, and internal users have a single sign-on experience with integrated Windows authentication, in case you don't know what IWA is. Some of the cons of this approach: internal users access ArcGIS Online with separate logins. Partners do not have a single sign-on experience in this process, and an external publishing workflow is necessary in this process. Now, some organizations, of course, want to use both ArcGIS Online and also spin up Portal on-premise. This is actually a more and more common pattern, and we even recommend it for a number of enterprises. Some of the pros: same scalability and segmentation benefits for public services. Portal and server federation provide the employees a single sign-on experience. How many customers here have a federated Portal server implementation? Have you done that? Okay, it's still a rare breed, but it does work well in this type of implementation. Now, some of the cons of the internal Portal management and hardware, you own that, and you have separate workflows for Portal and ArcGIS Online. Then there's some customers who want to just stay out in the cloud with ArcGIS Online, so they spin up separate ArcGIS Online orgs, a public one and a private one. The pros of this approach: ArcGIS Online operates as a centralized discovery portal. And more mobile users and the collector app can be used to access ArcGIS Online directly. And enterprise logins can be utilized for an employee single sign-on experience. Yes?
Sorry, what's the distinction between this one and the previous one? Like, what's the main distinction?
Okay, so this is two ArcGIS Online organizations. The previous one, I show it here. So this one here is actually an on-prem portal implementation, so in-house and ArcGIS Online. And so now you're doing segmentation of saying, I'm trusting my sensitive information to stay just in-house, right? And mostly my less sensitive is going to go out in ArcGIS Online. Versus this next one, I just spin up two ArcGIS Online organizations in the cloud.
But all the data is on premise.
Well, that can vary. So not all the data necessarily. So many times, if it's public-facing information, you might actually upload that and put that into your public organization. So yeah, that's a good question as far as the variance of how you balance utilizing that public and private concept of an organization. So of course, some of the cons behind this, now you're managing two ArcGIS Online organizations. You have partner logins in this case are being managed within ArcGIS Online. They're not using single sign-on into your ArcGIS Online. One last scenario for deployment architecture. If a customer, and this is just a variance of a previous one, if I want to share sensitive internal data but provide subsets out to external public users, but they don't want to have to manage and maintain the server infrastructure themselves, so they don't want to have to deal with that, then that's where that managed services or Esri Managed Cloud Services comes in. That's where they provide 24/7 operations supporting equivalent of an on-premise ArcGIS server and portal instance for you. And then you can combine that with ArcGIS Online. An example of that is US Census, who did a FedRAMP authorization of such a solution just last year. To give you a little bit more context of the architecture for a deployment of our products in the cloud, if you were to get the basic Esri Managed Cloud Services capability, I'll give you a portal and server, data and everything else are pretty much on the same instance, and you just get up and running quickly for cheap. But the reality is when you want to get more secure, you typically break out your tiers and components from each other. Server and portal, relational database, file server infrastructure. And then you make these components active and put them in separate data centers, redundant. The information all gets passed from end users through a web application firewall to limit how much is actually even hitting your server infrastructure. And then, of course, you have a bunch of security infrastructure components: intrusion detection, centralized management, antivirus, right? Patch management, backups. These are all these green components are the ones that Amazon does not give you if you're just spinning up Omni by its own. And then, of course, there's a 24/7 security operations center behind that, and what's called a bastion gateway. So the administrators actually access the system via a different path than the end users. So I just wanted to give a summary of some of the common ArcGIS Online security questions, one of which has commonly been, where is my data being stored? Is it in the United States or is it somewhere in some other country? And all of our ArcGIS Online customer data resides within US data centers on US soil. Another question is my information encrypted? The organization administrator can force TLS encryption. Andrea pointed that out with that setting of the HTTPS option. Actually, this is a good one for you guys too. So how many of you even know if your setting is, if your ArcGIS Online organization is being forced to use HTTPS or not? You do know that? Okay, that's a good start. How many of you actually are forcing HTTPS? Wow, that's, okay, so the ones who know are the ones who have it set. Sort of makes sense. Okay, I need to work on those questions as far as gaining more incremental knowledge. Is my data locked into, yes, back there.
Is there any plans for the ArcGIS Online to actually have the option to have the data encrypted at rest?
Ooh, yes. So I'll let. Oh.
I thought it was part of your
Well, I don't talk about the future plans.
Oh, okay.
So I do talk about the as-is state that ArcGIS Online, we currently don't encrypt at rest.
Right.
But we have talked about this very subject.
Yeah, so yes, we are planning to just by default encrypt at rest the information that we have. And we have started on that project. There are some things actually that are encrypted, but it's very difficult to tell you like what specifically. But yes, we are planning in the future, hopefully not too distant future, probably in the next year or so to roll out encryption at rest across the platform.
I mean, because this is a multi-tenant environment, to me, that would be one of those things that I'm less prone to jump in full force now, because you're in a multi-tenant environment and you're not doing encryption and data at rest, so there's a greater exposure.
It's a very common concern and question that's brought up, and that's the reason why we're addressing. I just didn't want to speak for him. He's the one who has to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there are technical challenges basically, and we are working through them to do that wherever there's customer data involved.
Yep, but like you said, we have made significant progress in starting to encrypt a number of components in the infrastructure. We just, as opposed to bringing the audience a story that, hey, we encrypt some stuff and just making everybody scratch their heads, we're going to say when it's encrypted, it's done. So I look forward to that next year too. So is my data locked into ArcGIS Online? No, a customer can download the data back to their organization via shapefile, CSV, or even their original publication package. How do I know if ArcGIS Online was affected by the latest major internet vulnerability? There was Heartbleed and shell shock and those types of things. We have a website called trust.arcgis.com. How many of you here have used trust.arcgis.com? Woohoo! Hey, that's great. Now, did you know about the Trust site before this conference? Yes? Okay, that's awesome. Well, hopefully it's useful. If it's not, let me know that too. So this does answer these types of questions and more. We do have also the Cloud Security Alliance answers out there in addition to that. As far as infrastructure and compliance, we do approach it from multiple levels. We have our corporate assurance. We have what we do with what our cloud infrastructure providers offer, what we build into our products and services, and even the solution guidance we're working on for our customers. As far as our history of efforts in compliance, we've been heavily involved since early on, since even the whole federal side of things started getting more heavily involved. Geospatial One Stop in 2005, when the FedRAMP programs first started getting started up, we worked with the government teams out there. We got the ArcGIS Online FISMA authorized in 2014, and what's called Esri Managed Cloud Services FedRAMP authorized in 2015. And we'll be working on transitioning from a FISMA authorization to FedRAMP for ArcGIS Online over the next year. And the difference really is FISMA was a law that was made up, you can see 2002, before there was a cloud. FedRAMP became a mechanism to be able to reuse approvals amongst agencies more cost effectively. For corporate compliance, our corporate security team has a charter that aligns with ISO 27000. International customers will understand what that is. And for privacy assurance, we work with an organization called TrustE. Our solution's actually what's called Trusted Cloud Certified, and we've worked with them on the safe harbor self-certification process. As far as our cloud infrastructure providers, we utilize world-class ones of Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. If you're interested in their reports, security reports, you can get them directly from those vendors. They have the SSA 16, SOC 123, they have their ISO compliance, and they even have FedRAMP materials for you. For products and services and solutions-based compliance, for products on ArcGIS Server, we did a STIG with DISA. That's defense, so it's a security technical implementation guide. So if you wanted to see how to lock down ArcGIS Server to a more rigorous hardened security environment, go ahead and check that out. You can actually just Google ArcGIS Server DISA STIG and it'll come up. ArcGIS Desktop, we do what's called a United States Government Configuration Baseline to make sure our product can work in a hardened environment. Some of our service-based initiatives for ArcGIS Online, I mentioned the FSMA Low, and for Esri Managed Cloud Services, we have the FedRAMP Moderate. For customers in law enforcement, we're working on guidance for how to best do some of these hybrid implementations we talked about to align with CJIS, or the Criminal Justice Information Systems requirements. And we're doing a similar process for healthcare. One of the things we even did for Esri Managed Cloud Services is a gap analysis to see, yes, if you have healthcare information, we can handle that also in Esri Managed Cloud Services at this time. So in summary, for the privacy and compliance aspects, we have Safe Harbor, and of course that's going to be evolving to the Privacy Shield the United States is working on with the EU. And well, I guess we'll have to figure out whatever it is UK has in parallel. Maybe it's too early to joke about that one. And then you have FSMA. I'm going to get booed. So then you have FSMA and FedRAMP for compliance efforts. This Cloud Security Alliance information, it's actually fairly extensive. It's about 30 pages. It's just one link on the trust site. If you miss it, and your security team has looked at the trust site and there's not that much there, they haven't seen this document. So if your organization needs detailed security assurance, make sure you have that. So in summary, ArcGIS Online security capabilities continue to advance, including encryption. And we utilize world-class infrastructure providers for our cloud-based services. We have extensive security, privacy, compliance, and status information available to you guys via the trust site that I mentioned. And we also have those in-depth cloud security lines answers. We also have the upcoming ArcGIS Online FedRAMP authorization effort going into play right now. And that will be across our two cloud providers of Azure and Amazon Web Services. If you want to learn more, please check out the trust site that I mentioned. And last but not least, the all-important, please fill out this survey because your feedback does help as far as which content was most useful to you. We were talking before the session of, how we can make sure we're targeting the information you need. Let us know, positive or negative. This will help us. So thank you very much. And should we open it up to questions?
We have 5 minutes.
Go ahead.
Two questions, but one I'll just take offline for later. But one in specific is in these confederated portal arrangements where you have data that is, let's just say, curated to a point where it's the authentic primary copy of something that's important for your organization, and then users can create subsets, derivatives, secondary versions, older copies. Do you have plans to come up with some type of class system so that you can rank the data set as the primary copy in your organization, so that for your external and your internal users, they'll know that they have the right version, not just the named similarly or identically?
Yeah, so, well, the question, real quick, is basically identifying the primary.
Single source of
Yeah, the single source of truth.
There's lots of works in
Yeah.
progress and
Yeah.
versions, and then you
Yeah.
go, well, what's the one that's the authoritative
Right.
winner and all that
And-
stuff that I have?
And yeah, we have gotten that feedback quite a bit at the conference. So, and it is definitely something we're thinking about. It's a bit of a challenge, but we are working on things like trying to keep track of, sort of where a data set came from, so you sort of have a trail of that, the copies that have been made and things like that. And yeah, being able to somehow,
The admin can
Right.
go and say designated.
So an admin-controlled tag?
Yeah, something simple.
yeah, some sort of way for you to mark this is authoritative, and also to do with, we've also heard the feedback of search. When you search for things, you should get that one first and not all the other copies of things and all that. So yeah, we are definitely thinking about that. It's it's a bit challenging to sort of technically to sort of figure that out, but yeah, we could at the very least give you some sort of ability to mark that at least within your organization.
We run into the problem often, we have about 100 users or so, that they will leave or move to a different organization, and then we try to find the data set. And we can't, as an administrator, we can't see all of the, the feature layers and stuff at once. You have to go to that user and then look at them. So
Right.
if you don't know who the user is, you're kind of guessing and trying to find, is there a way, maybe through the Python access, I don't know, to see everything?
Right. So yeah, the question is there a way to see everything as an administrator? Yeah, currently we don't have it. There's ways to do it via the APIs and Python SDKs and so on. But yeah, it involves you writing some scripts and other things. There's also some tools that some partners like GeoJob and others have created that you might be able to leverage. I don't know if it would exactly answer that. But yeah, no, I think one thing that you can do as an administrator, you should be able to search, and that should give you, if you know the data set you're looking for, you could use a search to find it. Because as an administrator, you should be able to find that within your organization.
That assumes they actually named it something.
Yeah, if you don't actually know sort of what it is, but you can do it by ownership of user and things like that. But yeah, no, I understand that feedback. So we'll think about it. I mean, yeah, would it be more sort of something where, yeah, just a big long laundry list of every single piece of content and
One more question.
makes sense.
Hi, so my organization just recently switched, or turned on the enterprise login capability. And whether it's by accident or design, I'm not sure. What we have is people still have their ArcGIS Online credentials, and then there's also their enterprise accounts. So there's two different accounts. So that's creating a bit of inconvenience in transferring items over to different users, group owners, and all that. Is there a way to say, all right, merge this ArcGIS Online account with this enterprise account, or we just have to manually move over?
Yeah, so the question is about merging or moving from built-in accounts to enterprise accounts and moving all the information. And this question actually came up yesterday too. There isn't really sort of a call it out of the box way of doing that. I mean, the challenge for us was we don't know, the mapping between the old users to the new users, so we couldn't really do anything automatically for you to try to facilitate that. I believe there are tools that our professional services folks have created. I believe there is something on GitHub, but I don't know exactly, that we put out that basically does it somewhat programmatically for you, right? So you still, maybe it takes a little bit more of a developer mindset to do that, but it kind of helps you, especially if you have lots and lots of users, to sort of do that moving. I mean, you can manually go and transfer information from one user to another, but if you've got more than a dozen users or something, it gets pretty cumbersome.
close it down. Time's
Oh,
up.
oh, time's up. Okay, sorry. But
we can take
we'll be around, so you can.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
guys.